Chapter 1. The moment everything collapsed. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear. It was 2 a.m, and the fluorescent lights above Evelyn Carter flickered just enough to make the world feel unreal, like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't noticed the blood at first. It was only when a nurse gently touched her wrist that Evelyn looked down and saw it. Dark, sticky, smeared across her fingers and the sleeve of her coat. It wasn't her blood. That realization hit her harder than the cold air in her lungs. Across the room, behind a glass door marked "Emergency Only," doctors moved quickly around a body lying still on a narrow bed. Tubes, machines, a monitor screaming out a rhythm that sounded too fast, too angry, too fragile. Her husband, Mark Carter. The man she had married 20 years ago. The man she had shared a house with, children with, silence with. The man who had walked out of their home just hours earlier with a look she couldn't forget. And now he wasn't waking up. A doctor stepped toward her. His face was careful, practiced, trained to deliver words that could destroy lives without breaking his own voice. "We've stabilized him, but he's in a coma. We don't know how long it will last." Evelyn nodded, though she wasn't sure she understood. The words passed through her like sound through water, distorted, distant, heavy. Behind her, a small sound cut through everything. "Mommy." Her daughter, Lily, stood near the wall, knees pulled to her chest, face streaked with tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away anymore. She was 16, but at that moment she looked like a child again, small, frightened, shattered. Evelyn tried to move toward her. Her legs refused. Lily began to cry harder, her sobs sharp and uneven, like she was running out of air. A nurse crouched beside her, whispering soothing words that didn't seem to help. Evelyn stared at the glass separating her from her husband. Images crashed into her mind without permission. Mark standing in the kitchen earlier that night, rain dripping from his jacket, his jaw tight, his voice low, his eyes exhausted. "I can't do this tonight, Evelyn." She had followed him into the hallway, asked the same question she always asked. "Why are you acting like this? What are you hiding? Why won't you just tell me the truth?" He hadn't yelled. That hurt more than if he had. "I need air. I need space. Please. Please." That word echoed now, mocking her. The police officer appeared quietly at her side, middle-aged, calm, the kind of man who had seen too many families fall apart at the worst hours of the night. The car hydroplaned, lost control on the highway. Single vehicle accident. Accident. The word landed wrong. Evelyn's chest tightened. An accident? Or something else? She remembered the way Mark's hands trembled as he reached for his keys, the way he avoided her eyes, the way he paused at the door just for a second, as if he wanted to say something, and then didn't. Was he angry? Desperate? Running from her? Or running from himself? Her mind began to race, filling the silence with possibilities. What if he hadn't meant to come back? What if the crash wasn't an accident altogether? What if she had pushed him too far? Her heart pounded harder with every thought. Stop, she told herself. Just stop. But she couldn't. Over the years, thinking had become her reflex, her shield, her curse. If she thought long enough, hard enough, she believed she could prevent disaster. if she anticipated every threat, every betrayal, every lie, she could protect her family. That's what she told herself. But standing there under the harsh hospital lights, watching her daughter fall apart and her husband lie unconscious, one thought forced its way to the surface. What if thinking too much hadn't protected anything? What if it had destroyed everything? The doctor returned, this time with paperwork and instructions. Words like monitoring, neurological response, and wait and see floated around her without anchoring. Evelyn signed where she was told, her handwriting barely legible. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. For a split second, she thought it might be Mark, some impossible miracle, a message explaining everything. It wasn't. It was a notification from earlier that night, one she had ignored in the chaos. An unsent message from her. "We need to talk. I know something is wrong." Her throat closed. She lowered herself into a plastic chair, suddenly exhausted, her body finally catching up to the shock. The blood on her hands had dried now, stiff against her skin. Lily's crying softened into quiet, broken breaths. Evelyn stared at the floor. She thought about all the nights she had stayed awake replaying conversations, all the signs she had analyzed, all the scenarios she had imagined. She had told herself she was being careful. She had told herself she was being a good wife, a good mother. But sitting there, surrounded by the aftermath of something she couldn't undo, one thought burned louder than the rest. If I had stopped overthinking, if I had trusted more, if I had let go just once, would they be here right now? She pressed her blood-stained hands together, finally letting the tears come. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears slipping down her face, heavy with regret. In the reflection of the glass, Evelyn barely recognized herself. And as the machines continued their steady, unforgiving rhythm, one truth settled deep inside her. This night wasn't just about an accident. It was about everything that led them here. And whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 2. The Signs She Couldn't Stop Thinking About. It didn't begin with betrayal. It began with timing. Mark started coming home later than usual, not dramatically late, just enough to feel wrong. 15 minutes, 20, sometimes 40. He always had a reason: traffic, a meeting that ran long, a coworker who needed help. All of it sounded reasonable. All of it sounded true. That was the worst part. If he had been cruel, Evelyn might have understood. If he had been distant on purpose, she could have named it. But Mark was still polite, still asked if she'd eaten, still kissed Lily on the head before heading upstairs. Yet something had shifted, and Evelyn felt it the way people feel an approaching storm before the clouds appear. She noticed the phone first. It used to sit openly on the kitchen counter, screen lighting up with sports alerts or group chats. Now it was always face down, always close to him. When it vibrated, his hand moved too quickly, an instinct, not a decision. Evelyn told herself not to look. She told herself trust mattered more than suspicion. But her eyes followed the phone anyway. One night, as Mark showered upstairs, it buzzed again. The screen lit up just enough for her to see a single line before it went dark. "Can you talk later?" No name, no context, just words. Evelyn's chest tightened. She stood there longer than she meant to, staring at the black screen as if it might explain itself. When Mark came back down, towel around his neck, she stepped away too quickly. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said, too fast. And that was how it started. Small moments stacking on top of each other, building a structure she couldn't tear down even if she tried. Lily changed too. Her daughter had always been expressive, dramatic in the way teenagers were allowed to be. But now she grew quiet in a way that felt deliberate. She answered questions with shrugs, ate dinner quickly, took her plate to her room. "How was school?" Evelyn asked one evening. "Fine." "Anything interesting happen?" "No." Lily didn't look at her when she spoke. Evelyn watched her disappear upstairs and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Children knew things. They sensed tension adults pretended wasn't there. If Lily was withdrawing, it had to mean something. Everything meant something now. At night, Evelyn lay awake beside Mark, listening to his breathing. He slept quickly, deeply, as if nothing troubled him at all. She, on the other hand, counted minutes, replayed conversations, dissected every word she had said and every word he hadn't. Why didn't he ask about her day anymore? Why did he turn his body away when he slept? Why did she feel lonelier next to him than when she was alone? She didn't ask him any of this. Asking would mean confrontation. Confrontation would mean answers. And answers could destroy the fragile balance she was desperately trying to maintain. So, she thought instead. She thought while washing dishes. She thought while folding laundry. She thought while sitting in the car waiting for Lily to come out of school. Her mind filled the silence with possibilities. What if Mark was unhappy and didn't know how to say it? What if Lily had overheard something she wasn't supposed to? What if they were both protecting her from a truth she couldn't handle? The thoughts didn't come all at once. They arrived one by one, quiet and convincing, until they felt less like fear and more like preparation. Evelyn began adjusting her behavior without realizing it. She checked the clock more often, asked where Mark was going even when she already knew, texted Lily reminders she didn't need. "Did you eat? Where are you? Are you okay?" The messages were loving, on the surface, but underneath them lived something else, panic disguised as care. Mark noticed first. "You don't need to worry so much, Ev," he said gently one night as he hovered near the door while he put on his jacket. "I know, call me if you're late." He paused, looked at her for a moment too long. "I will." When the door closed behind him, Evelyn exhaled, unaware she'd been holding her breath. She walked through the house, checking lights that were already off, straightened pillows that didn't need fixing. Her thoughts spiraled faster when she was alone. Why did he hesitate before answering? Why did his eyes look tired even when he smiled? Why did it feel like something was slipping through her fingers? When Mark came back, bags in hand, Evelyn felt relief flood her body, so strong it almost made her dizzy. She smiled too brightly, asked too many questions, laughed at things that weren't funny. He noticed that too. "Ev," he said carefully, "you don't have to watch me like that." The word stung. "I'm not watching you." "Yes, you are." Silence filled the space between them, not angry, not explosive, just thick. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, listening. Evelyn saw her and softened immediately. "I just care, that's all." Mark didn't argue. He never did. He just nodded and carried the groceries into the kitchen. That night, Evelyn sat at the edge of the bed long after Mark fell asleep. She held her phone in her hand, tempted to scroll through old photos, proof that they had been happy once, that nothing was wrong. Instead, she stared at the dark screen and felt the weight of her own thoughts press in. She didn't have evidence. She didn't have proof. She didn't even have a clear accusation. She only had feelings and imagination and a growing certainty that if she didn't stay alert, the alert would come anyway. So she stayed alert. She watched. She listened. She worried. And without realizing it, Evelyn began to tighten her grip on the people she loved, not out of anger, but out of fear. Fear that if she stopped thinking, stopped anticipating, stopped preparing for the worst would come anyway. By the time she lay down beside Mark again, Her mind was racing faster than ever, and somewhere, deep inside her, a quiet voice whispered a warning she wasn't ready to hear. This wasn't protection anymore. It was control. Chapter 3. A Truth or an Illusion. Evelyn never planned to read Mark's emails. That was the lie she told herself later when guilt tried to catch up with curiosity. The truth was simpler and uglier. The opportunity presented itself, and she didn't stop her hands. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon. Mark had taken Lily to visit a friend, leaving Evelyn alone in the house with a silence that felt too loud. She cleaned the kitchen twice, rearranged a bookshelf that didn't need rearranging, tried to watch television without hearing a word. Mark's laptop sat open on the desk in the corner of the living room. He had forgotten to close it. Evelyn noticed it immediately. Her heart began to beat faster, not from excitement, but from a familiar tension that had become her constant companion. She told herself she would only close the screen, just that, nothing more. But her feet moved before her mind could catch up. The inbox was already open. She froze, standing there, staring at a list of messages that meant nothing on their own. Work emails, bills, promotions, ordinary life. Relief washed through her for a brief moment. Then she saw the name, Lydia R. Not once, not twice, a thread. Evelyn clicked before she could talk herself out of it. The emails weren't romantic. There were no hearts, no confessions, no stolen endearments. That almost made it worse. The tone was restrained, careful, measured. Thank you for opening up today. We should continue this conversation next week. It's important that you don't feel judged. Evelyn felt heat rise in her chest. Who spoke like that? Not a coworker, not a friend. Someone professional, someone intimate in a different way. She scrolled further, her hands trembling. Remember, clarity comes when we slow our thoughts. You're not alone in this. The words blurred together as Evelyn's mind began filling in the gaps. Her thoughts raced faster than her eyes could move. Opening up, not alone. Judged. What was he telling this woman that he couldn't tell his wife? A wave of anger surged through her, sharp and sudden, followed immediately by fear. She imagined Mark sitting across from Lydia somewhere quiet, his voice low, his guard down. She imagined him saying things he no longer said at home. She imagined intimacy where there might not have been none. Evelyn closed the laptop abruptly, as if it had burned her. Her heart pounded in her ears. This wasn't proof, she knew that. There was nothing explicit, nothing undeniable. But it was enough. Enough for her mind to build a narrative so vivid it felt real. He's confiding in her. He trusts her. He needs her. The thought twisted inside Evelyn like a blade. Her phone rang, slicing through the spiral. The school. She answered quickly, grateful for the interruption. "Mrs. Carter," the voice said, careful and polite. "We'd like you to come in today. It's about Lily." Evelyn's stomach dropped. At the school, the hallway smelled faintly of cleaner and pencil shavings. She sat across from Lily's homeroom teacher and the school counselor, hands folded tightly in her lap. "Lily has been withdrawn lately," the counselor said. "She's had emotional outbursts in class, difficulty focusing." "That's not like her," Evelyn said immediately. "She's just going through a phase." The teacher exchanged a look with the counselor. "There's something else," the teacher said gently. During a writing assignment, Lily expressed fear, not about school, about home. Evelyn felt her breath catch. What kind of fear? The counselor leaned forward. "She wrote that she feels like she's always watched, that she's afraid of upsetting you." The words struck harder than any accusation. "Afraid of me?" Evelyn repeated insistently. "That's ridiculous. I'm her mother." I'm sure you care deeply, but Lily described feeling anxious around you. She said she worries about saying the wrong thing. Evelyn shook her head. She's exaggerating. She also said she feels responsible for your emotions, the teacher added softly. Something cold slid down Evelyn's spine. They were wrong. They had to be. They didn't see the whole picture. They didn't understand how fragile families were, how easily they could fall apart if someone wasn't paying attention. I just want to protect her, Evelyn said. I want to know what's going on in her life. And that's understandable, the counselor replied. But sometimes protection can feel like pressure. Evelyn left the school with a forced smile and a storm building behind her. At home that evening, Lily barely spoke. She went straight to her room, closing the door with quiet finality. Evelyn stood in the hallway, staring at the wood, replaying the words she'd heard. Afraid of me. Downstairs, Mark arrived later than usual, again. Evelyn watched him take off his jacket, noticed the tired slump of his shoulders. For a moment, she almost confronted him, almost asked about Lydia, almost demanded answers. Instead, she said nothing. She observed. She catalogued. Mark avoided her gaze. Lily didn't come down for dinner. The house felt divided, each of them retreating into separate corners. That night, Evelyn sat alone in the dark living room, the laptop closed, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Her thoughts churned relentlessly. Was Mark hiding something? Was Lily hiding something? Or was she the one creating secrets where none existed? The question unsettled her more than any imagined betrayal. She replayed the emails in her head, the tone, the words. She replayed Lily's expression at the school, the way her eyes dropped when the counselor spoke. What if they were both reacting to her? The idea felt dangerous, almost offensive. Evelyn had always been the responsible one, the vigilant one, the one who cared enough to worry. And yet, the more she thought about it, the more distorted everything became. Facts bent under the weight of interpretation. Silence grew suspicious. Neutral words turned threatening. She felt trapped inside her own mind, unsure which thoughts were warnings and which were inventions. As she finally lay down in bed, Mark already asleep beside her, Evelyn stared at the ceiling. Somewhere between truth and fear, something was unraveling, and she no longer trusted her own thoughts enough to know which side she was on.
Chapter 4. When Thoughts Turn into Action. Evelyn stopped trusting silence. Silence used to mean peace. Now it felt like proof. Proof that things were happening beyond her reach, conversations she wasn't part of, decisions made without her. Every quiet moment became a space her mind rushed to fill. So she started watching. Not openly, not obviously, just enough to feel prepared. She noted the time Mark left the house, the time he returned, the routes he claimed to take. She memorized the pattern of his days the way someone memorizes exits in a burning building. When he said he had a meeting after work, she imagined Lydia sitting across from him, her voice calm, her eyes understanding. When he said he needed space, Evelyn imagined suitcases packed in secret. When Lily stayed in her room, Evelyn imagined whispered truths exchanged behind closed doors. Her thoughts no longer arrived as questions. They arrived as conclusions. He's cheating. He's planning to leave. They both know something I don't. Once those ideas took root, everything else bent around them. Evelyn began asking questions that didn't sound like questions. Who were you texting? Why didn't you answer right away? Why are you always tired lately? Mark answered patiently at first, too patiently. Work, he said, nothing else. But Evelyn watched his eyes as he spoke, watched his hands, watched for hesitation. When she didn't see what she expected, she assumed he was hiding it better. She checked the trash for receipts, listened when he took phone calls in the garage, drove past his office once just to see if his car was there. It was. That should have calmed her. It didn't. At night, she lay awake building entire conversations that had never happened, scenes vivid enough to feel real. Mark confessing, Lily crying, Lydia smiling politely as she took what Evelyn believed was hers. The images fueled her anger and justified it all at once. One evening, Evelyn confronted Lily. They were alone in the kitchen, the house quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher. Lily stood by the counter, scrolling through her phone. "You've been acting strange," Evelyn said. Lily stiffened. "What do you mean?" "You barely talk to me anymore. You disappear into your room. Is something going on?" "No," Lily replied quickly. Evelyn stepped closer. "You can tell me. I'm your mother." Lily's jaw tightened. "I said nothing's wrong." "That's not an answer," Evelyn snapped. The word hung in the air, sharper than she intended. Lily's eyes flashed with something between fear and anger. "Why are you always like this? Why can't you just leave things alone?" Evelyn felt her chest tighten. "Because things are not fine." "According to who?" Lily shot back. Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it. The truth, whatever it was, felt just out of reach. Later that night, when Mark came home soaked from the rain, Evelyn was waiting. "Where were you?" she asked. "I was at work," he said, dropping his keys. "You're lying." Mark froze. "Excuse me?" "I know about Lydia," Evelyn said, her voice trembling despite her effort to control it. Mark stared at her. "What?" "I read your emails." The silence that followed was deafening. "You went through my laptop?" he asked slowly. "Don't change the subject," Evelyn said. "Who is she?" Mark ran a hand through his wet hair. "She's not who you think she is." "That's convenient. You talk to her more than you talk to me." "That's not true." "Then explain the emails. Explain why you open up to her but shut me out." Mark's face hardened. "This is exactly why I didn't tell you." Evelyn felt a surge of triumph mixed with terror. "So there is something." "There is, but it's not an affair." "Then what is it?" Mark hesitated. That hesitation ignited everything Evelyn had been holding back. "So you admit you're hiding something," she said, her voice rising. "You admit you're planning something behind my back." Mark shook his head. "You're not listening." "I'm listening to everything you won't say," Evelyn shouted. The rain outside intensified, pounding against the windows like a warning. Evelyn moved closer, her hands clenched. "Are you leaving us?" she demanded. "No." "Are you cheating on me?" "No." "Then why does it feel like I'm already alone?" Mark slammed his hand against the counter. "Because you won't stop assuming the worst." The sound echoed through the house. Upstairs, a door creaked open. Lily stood at the top of the stairs, watching. "Go back to your room," Evelyn snapped without turning. "Stop yelling," Lily said, her voice shaking. Mark looked up at their daughter, guilt flashing across his face. "It's okay. Go upstairs." "It's not okay," Lily cried. "You're both acting crazy." Evelyn spun toward her. "Don't speak to me like that." "I'm scared. I don't know what you want from us." The words cut deeper than any accusation Mark had made. Evelyn felt something snap. "I want the truth," she yelled. "I want honesty. I want to stop feeling like I'm being lied to in my own house." "You're not being lied to," Mark shouted back. "You're destroying everything with these thoughts." The argument exploded. Words flew faster than Evelyn could control. Accusations, defenses, old wounds dragged into the open. Every fear she had nursed now had a voice. Neighbors later said they heard screaming. They heard glass break. They heard the front door slam so hard the walls shook. In the chaos, Lily ran back to her room, locking the door. Mark grabbed his jacket, his face pale and furious. "I can't do this tonight. I can't breathe in this house." "You're running away," Evelyn said. "I'm trying to survive," he shot back. The door slammed behind him, rattling the frame. Evelyn stood alone in the living room, rain leaking in through the open doorway, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She told herself she had done the right thing. She told herself confrontation was necessary. She told herself the truth would come out now. But as the house settled into an uneasy silence, a different feeling crept in. Not relief, fear. Because for the first time, Evelyn realized her thoughts were no longer just thoughts. They were shaping reality. And something terrible had been set in motion, something she would not be able to stop.
Chapter 5. When the family finally shattered. The truth didn't arrive gently. It came in pieces, sharp, humiliating, undeniable, cutting through everything Evelyn had built inside her mind. Mark didn't come home that night. Evelyn sat awake on the couch until dawn, the house heavy with the echo of slammed doors and unfinished sentences. Every sound outside made her flinch. Every passing car felt like a decision being made without her. By morning, she was exhausted and hollow, convinced that the worst had finally happened. He's leaving, she thought. This is how it ends. But the call she received just after 9 wasn't what she expected. "Evelyn," Mark said quietly, "we need to talk. Today, in person." They met at a small office building across town. Neutral ground, he had said. Evelyn walked in with her shoulders tense, prepared for a confession that would confirm every fear she'd been carrying. Instead, she saw Lydia. She was nothing like Evelyn had imagined. No flirtation in her posture, no softness meant to seduce. She wore simple clothes, glasses perched low on her nose, a notebook resting on her lap. She looked calm, professional, human. "This is Dr. Lydia Reynolds. She's a family therapist." Evelyn's breath caught. "You said she wasn't—" "She's not who you think she is," Mark said gently. "She never was." The room felt smaller. Evelyn looked from Mark to Lydia, her thoughts scrambling to rearrange themselves. "Then why were you emailing her like that?" "Because I was asking for help," Mark said. The words landed harder than any accusation. "For what?" Evelyn asked, her voice unsteady. Mark exhaled slowly, as if he had been holding his breath for months. "For us, for you, for our family." Lydia spoke then, her tone careful, respectful. "Mark came to me because he was worried, not about infidelity, about emotional strain, about fear becoming control." Evelyn shook her head. "That's not—" "You're not a bad person," Lydia said calmly, "but you're overwhelmed. And when fear goes untreated, it leaks into everything." Mark looked at Evelyn with a sadness that cut deeper than anger ever could. "I didn't know how to talk to you anymore," he said. "Every conversation turned into an interrogation. Every silence became a crime. I was afraid to say the wrong thing." Afraid. That word echoed in Evelyn's chest. "You should have told me," she said weakly. "I tried," Mark replied. "You didn't hear it. You only heard what your mind told you." Evelyn felt the room spin. This wasn't the story she had prepared for. There was no betrayal to fight, no villain to defeat, just consequences. "And Lily?" Evelyn asked suddenly. "What about Lily?" Mark looked down. Lydia reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook. "Mark asked me to read something before today." She opened it carefully. Lydia's handwriting filled the pages, tight, rushed, uneven. "I feel like I'm always doing something wrong. I don't know how to act around Mom anymore.
I love her, but I wish she would stop thinking. Evelyn's chest constricted. Lydia read the last line quietly. I wish my mom would stop thinking so much. I just want her to be happy. The words blurred as tears filled Evelyn's eyes. This wasn't an accusation. It was a plea. Evelyn pressed her hands to her mouth, shaking. The room went silent, except for her uneven breathing. She's scared, Mark said softly. She's been scared for a long time. Evelyn remembered Lily at the top of the stairs, the way her daughter's voice had trembled, the fears she had dismissed. I never meant to hurt her, Evelyn whispered. I know, Mark said, but intentions don't erase impact. The truth settled in slowly, painfully. The family wasn't breaking apart because of an affair. There was no secret lover, no betrayal of vows. What had destroyed them was something quieter and more dangerous. Fear that never rested. Fear that grew unchecked. Fear that disguised itself as care. Evelyn believed vigilance was love, that worry was responsibility, that overthinking meant protection. But sitting there, listening to her husband describe walking on eggshells and her daughter's words bleed off the page, she saw the damage clearly for the first time. She had been fighting an enemy that didn't exist, and in the process, she had wounded the people she loved most. I don't know how to stop, Evelyn said, her voice breaking. Lydia met her gaze. That's the first honest thing you've said today. Mark reached for Evelyn's hand, hesitated, then let it rest on the table between them. Not touching, but close. We're not broken because we don't love each other. We're broken because we're afraid. Evelyn closed her eyes as the weight of that truth pressed down on her. This was worse than betrayal, because betrayal could be blamed on someone else. This lived inside her, and now that it was finally exposed, there was no place left to hide.
Chapter 6. Who was really destroying everything? The room stayed quiet long after Lydia finished speaking. Evelyn sat frozen, her hands clenched together so tightly her fingers ached. She felt exposed in a way she had never experienced before. Not accused, not attacked, but seen, truly seen. There's something else you need to understand, Lydia said carefully. Something Mark struggled with, whether to share. Mark's jaw tightened. He looked at Evelyn with an expression she didn't recognize right away. Not anger, not fear, guilt. After Lily was born, he began, you didn't sleep, you barely ate, you were terrified all the time. Evelyn's chest tightened. That was years ago. You were diagnosed with severe postpartum anxiety. You had panic attacks. You were convinced something terrible would happen if you weren't constantly alert. Evelyn swallowed hard. She remembered fragments. Nights pacing the hallway with Lily in her arms, checking her breathing over and over, calling the pediatrician for every small symptom. I got help, Evelyn said quickly. I went to therapy. You did, Mark agreed, and it helped, for a while. Lydia leaned forward slightly. But treatment only works if it continues. Evelyn felt heat rush to her face. I was fine. You decided you were fine, Mark said softly. You stopped going. You stopped the medication. You said you didn't want a label hanging over our family. The words landed like blows. I didn't want Lily to grow up thinking her mother was unstable, Evelyn snapped. Mark nodded. So I agreed. I thought you were strong enough to manage it on your own. And I was, Evelyn insisted. Lydia's voice was calm but firm. You weren't broken, Evelyn, but anxiety doesn't disappear just because we stop naming it. It adapts. Evelyn shook her head, fighting the rising panic. So you think this is all my fault? No, Lydia said. I think it's a shared silence. Mark's jaw tightened. He looked at Evelyn with an expression she didn't recognize right away. Not anger, not fear, guilt. After Lily was born, he began, you didn't sleep, you barely ate, you were terrified all the time. Evelyn's chest tightened. That was years ago. You were diagnosed with severe postpartum anxiety. You had panic attacks. You were convinced something terrible would happen if you weren't constantly alert. Evelyn swallowed hard. She remembered fragments. Nights pacing the hallway with Lily in her arms, checking her breathing over and over, calling the pediatrician for every small symptom. I got help, Evelyn said quickly. I went to therapy. You did, Mark agreed, and it helped. For a while. Lydia leaned forward slightly. But treatment only works if it continues. Evelyn felt heat rush to her face. I was fine. You decided you were fine, Mark said softly. You stopped going. You stopped the medication. You said you didn't want a label hanging over our family. The words landed like blows. I didn't want Lily to grow up thinking her mother was unstable, Evelyn snapped. Mark nodded. So I agreed. I thought you were strong enough to manage it on your own. And I was, Evelyn insisted. Lydia's voice was calm but firm. You weren't broken, Evelyn, but anxiety doesn't disappear just because we stop naming it. It adapts. Evelyn shook her head, fighting the rising panic. So you think this is all my fault? No, Lydia said. I think it's a shared silence. Mark looked down. I hid it. I thought I was protecting you, protecting Lily, protecting the image of our family. Evelyn laughed bitterly. So instead, you watched me unravel. I watched you change, slowly, so slowly I convinced myself it wasn't happening. Evelyn's thoughts raced. This couldn't be true. She was careful. She was responsible. She was doing what mothers were supposed to do. I was just trying to keep us safe, she whispered. I know, Mark said, but somewhere along the way, safety turned into fear, and fear turned into control. Evelyn pressed her hands against her temples. Memories surfaced uninvited, checking Lily's location repeatedly on her phone, rewriting conversations in her head late at night, interpreting every pause as danger. The signs had been there. She just hadn't wanted to see them. I didn't tell you about Lydia at first because I was afraid, Mark admitted, afraid it would trigger something, afraid you'd spiral. And you thought secrecy would help? Evelyn asked sharply. No, he said. I thought silence would. The irony cut deep. For years, Evelyn had believed silence meant things were under control, that if nothing was said out loud, nothing bad could happen. She had been wrong. So what now? Evelyn asked quietly. Lydia met her gaze. Now you decide whether you want to keep fighting inside your own head or start listening to it. Evelyn felt tears gather, not from pain this time, but from something heavier. Recognition. There was no villain in this story, no betrayal to punish, no one to blame cleanly. Just a woman who had stopped treating her anxiety and convinced herself vigilance was strength. I thought stopping meant I was strong. I thought needing help meant I was weak. Mark shook his head. Needing help means you're human. The room fell silent again. Evelyn realized something then, something that terrified her more than any imagined affair. The destruction hadn't come from outside the family. It had grown quietly, patiently inside her own mind. And unless she chose differently, it would keep growing. There was no clear enemy to fight, only a battle she had been running from for years. And now, at last, she had nowhere left to hide.
Chapter 7. When peace comes too late. The sound of the monitor pulled Evelyn back into the present. A steady rhythm, mechanical, unforgiving. She sat alone in the hospital room now, the argument replaying in her mind with brutal clarity. Every word, every look, every moment she wished she could rewind. The rain, the shouting, the door slamming hard enough to shake the walls. Mark's last words before he left the house echoed relentlessly. I can't breathe in this house.
She had stood there, frozen, convinced he was being dramatic, convinced he would cool off, convinced he would come back once she had time to think through what she would say next. She always needed time to think. Outside, the storm had been relentless. Rain pouring down in sheets, the streetlights blurring into streaks of white and red. Mark had gotten into the car without looking back. Not because he didn't care, but because if he did, he knew he wouldn't leave. Evelyn remembered standing by the window, watching the tail lights disappear, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and certainty. Let him go, she had thought. He needs to understand how serious this is. What she hadn't understood was how fragile desperation could be. The police officer's voice from earlier returned to her, slow and careful. At that speed, hydroplaning, there was no time to recover. Speed. Mark hadn't been reckless by nature. He drove carefully, thoughtfully, always. Unless he wasn't thinking at all. Unless he was drowning in the same storm she had been living in for years. Only his storm had finally pushed him to escape instead of analyze. Evelyn closed her eyes, pressing her palms together as if that could hold her apart. If I hadn't followed him with accusations, if I hadn't forced the conversation, if I hadn't needed answers right then, the guilt came in waves, heavy and suffocating. She remembered the look on his face as he grabbed his jacket. Not anger, not hatred, defeat. The door had slammed not because he wanted to hurt her, but because he needed the noise to drown out everything else. A nurse stepped into the room quietly. You can see him now. Evelyn stood on unsteady legs and walked toward the bed. Mark lay still, his face pale, bruised, unfamiliar. Tubes traced lines across his body, machines doing the work he couldn't. She took his hand carefully, afraid to break him further. I didn't mean it, she whispered. I didn't mean any of it. But apologies had no power here. She thought of Lily, sitting alone in the waiting room, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The sound of her crying earlier cut through Evelyn sharper than any accusation. I'm scared. I don't know what you want from us. Evelyn finally understood. Her overthinking hadn't stayed inside her head. It had spilled into every room of their home. It had turned love into tension, concern into pressure, care into control. She believed thinking ahead meant protection, but standing there, watching her husband lie unconscious and her family fracture under the weight of unspoken fear, the truth was impossible to deny. Overthinking didn't just destroy peace. It destroyed safety. It destroyed trust. It destroyed the people who lived closest to it. Mark's fingers twitched slightly in her hand. Her breath caught, but his eyes didn't open. Evelyn rested her forehead against his arm, tears falling freely now, unrestrained by pride or logic. I should have stopped. I should have listened. I should have trusted. For the first time, her thoughts didn't race ahead. They didn't analyze. They didn't predict. They stayed right there in the unbearable present. This was the cost of never letting her mind rest. This was the price of believing fear was responsibility. She wanted peace so badly, she suffocated it. And now, when peace finally began to settle, quiet, heavy, undeniable, it had arrived too late to protect the people she loved. All Evelyn could do now was sit beside him, hold his hand, and face the truth she could no longer escape. Healing, she realized, would not begin with thinking harder. It would begin with letting go. Chapter 8. When the fight finally stops. The room was quiet in a way Evelyn had never known before. Not tense, not watchful, just still. She sat beside Mark's bed, her fingers loosely wrapped around his hand, afraid that if she held on too tightly, she might pull him back into the chaos they had both been trying to escape. The machines hummed softly, no longer screaming, no longer demanding attention. Time moved differently now. Minutes passed, then hours. Evelyn didn't count them. For the first time in years, she wasn't measuring, predicting, preparing. She was simply there. Mark's fingers moved again. This time, she didn't question it. His eyelids fluttered, slowly, as if waking took more effort than sleep ever had. When his eyes finally opened, they were unfocused at first, clouded by pain and exhaustion. Then they found her. Recognition. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Mark," she whispered, afraid her voice might break him. He looked at her for a long moment, as if searching her face for something familiar. There was no anger in his eyes, no accusation, just the tired calm that frightened her more than rage ever could. "You stayed," he said quietly. "Yes," Evelyn replied. "I'm here." He nodded once, barely, then his gaze drifted to the ceiling, his breathing slow and uneven. "I remember leaving," he said after a moment. "I remember thinking I just needed the noise to stop." Evelyn closed her eyes. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry." Mark turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes again. "If you want peace," he said softly, each word deliberate, "you have to stop fighting inside your own head." The sentence landed gently, but it shattered something open. Evelyn felt tears rise, but they didn't burn this time. They didn't rush. They fell quietly, as if her body finally understood there was no need to rush anymore. "I don't know how," she admitted. "That's okay. You don't have to know yet." A doctor entered the room shortly after, checking monitors, asking Mark simple questions. Evelyn stepped back, giving them space. Her heart still raced, but slower now, steadier. As the doctor finished, he paused beside her, his voice lowering. "This doesn't end here. Healing will hurt more than overthinking." Evelyn nodded. For once, the words didn't scare her. Later that day, after Lily had come in quietly and sat beside her father, after apologies had been exchanged without speeches or defenses, Evelyn found herself standing in a hallway she hadn't walked down in years. The therapy wing. The door at the end of the hall was open. She hesitated. Her instinct was to turn back, to think through every possible outcome, every fear, every excuse. Her mind tried to pull her back into familiar patterns. What if it doesn't help? What if I fail again? What if I'm not strong enough? She took a breath, and then she stepped forward anyway. Inside the room, the chair waited, neutral, patient, unassuming. Evelyn sat down slowly, her hands resting in her lap. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who looked tired but honest, afraid but present, broken but willing. For the first time, she didn't come with answers. She came with silence, with the understanding that peace was not something she could think her way into. It was something she had to allow. As the door closed softly behind her, Evelyn lifted her gaze. Her eyes still carried fear, but beneath it, finally, there was relief.